All right, good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many folks joining this morning. I am Jen Forest. I am a member of YouthTruth's partnership team. Thank you for joining us this morning or afternoon to listen to what over 20,000 American students had to say about their experiences learning at home last spring. We are going to be live tweeting today's webinar. You can follow along on Twitter at youth_truth. Our colleague Logan will also be monitoring the Q&A submissions. She can answer your questions, and she may save some of your questions for our panelists during the Q&A portion of the webinar. YouthTruth is a nonprofit organization built on the philosophical and research principle that student voice is a necessary ingredient in school improvement. YouthTruth collects student, staff, and family feedback about their experiences and provides actionable data to school systems and philanthropic funders. Today, my colleague Jimmy Simpson and I will present findings from our recent Students Weigh In, Learning and Wellbeing During COVID-19 project. We will then hear from 3 visionary leaders who joined in this project and who are committed to listening to their students: Shelley Reggiani, Michael McCarthy, and Erica Mazzio. We start, though, with some framing thoughts from Kent McGuire, Education Program Director from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Just to give you a very, very small sample of Kent's impressive background. Kent served as Dean of the College of Education at Temple University. He was President and CEO of the Southern Education Foundation. And from 1998 to 2001, he served as Assistant Secretary of Education. Before turning it over to Kent, I also want to heartily thank the philanthropic sponsors who provided critical support to this project: the Walton Family Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Most importantly, on behalf of all of us, I want to thank the 20,000 student respondents who shared their perspective on the lived experience of America's youth last spring, so that we might better rise to meet the challenges of this unprecedented time. Kent, you've got the floor.
Jennifer, thank you, and thanks for having me. As you all know, education as we've known it was disrupted about halfway through the spring semester when COVID-19 forced school closures across the country. And this sent our students home to learn remotely. I've seen a number of reports confirming that teachers weren't prepared for this, and that parents often struggled to support their kids' effort to learn. Maybe a third of our workforce at Hewlett are parents with school-age children, and we ran fast to figure out how to support them in supporting, their own kids. But we don't have much in the way of firsthand information from students, which in my view makes this YouthTruth study both timely and important. It sheds light on how students experienced the spring, and in what I would argue was a sincere effort on the part of schools to move to virtual instruction. The study offers clues nonetheless into what worked and maybe what didn't. Now, this is a sample of over 20,000 students. That is unique in and of itself. And so with real confidence, we use the data ourselves in our own effort to consider the challenges of reopening schools this fall. And I've shared the findings with many of my colleagues in the funding community as they contemplate their responses to COVID. And I would suggest that whether you're an educator, a policymaker, or a partner in supporting schools, that these data offer keen insights into the challenges and opportunities we will face in the coming year. So take the study to heart. Consider what our students are telling us. And I think our efforts really will guide whether kids develop well and learn this fall and during the year. My colleagues and I at Hewlett were frankly honored to contribute to this effort, and we trust you'll find real value in the findings. So Jennifer, thank you again for this opportunity just to say a few words.
Thank you, Kent. Over to my colleague, Jimmy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jimmy Simpson, Jr., and I am on the partnerships team here at YouthTruth. And we're going to do a quick poll just to get a better understanding about where folks are joining from. So you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen, and you'll have about 15-20 seconds to choose your answer. First, geographically, where are you joining from today? All right, take about 5 more seconds here. And let's look at those quick results. Lots of folks joining from the western part of the United States and from the Northeast. Welcome to all of you. Now, we are going to do a second and final poll because we saw in our RSVPs that we had lots of folks joining us from different sectors. So we're very curious to see how that is represented in today's attendees. And so you should see a second poll pop up on your screen. Right, so we're going to end that polling. Awesome, so wonderful to see our education partners, lots of nonprofit partners here, and our foundation friends. So one thing that we want to just share with you before we dive into the data is to just find out a little bit of who we heard from. So as you've heard from across the country, we heard from over 20,000 students in grades 5 through 12, and that is who responded to our survey. They came from 166 public schools across 9 states. One caveat that we would like to note is that our Students Weigh In survey was only accessible online, whether that was through a laptop, tablet, or smartphone, so participants did have some sort of access to technology. Our survey asked about a range of themes related to how students perceived their learning experiences and well-being. And you'll be able to see a more in-depth look into the data on our Students Weigh In website, which we will provide the link for after this webinar. But here are the 6 themes that we really want to highlight for you today. So we'll talk a little bit about what we are calling the COVID effect. And then we will dive into students' perceptions through the use of data and using students' own words. We'll then share our findings on student learning, motivation, obstacles to learning, relationships with teachers, and finally, students' sense of belonging and friendship. So let's start with the first area of insight, the COVID effect. So in our survey, we asked students, how much has the COVID-19 outbreak affected you? 46% said that they were either moderately or significantly affected by COVID-19. And only 9% of students said they were not at all affected. I'm going to repeat that because we're going to come back to the COVID effect several times today. So 46% of students said that they were moderately or significantly affected by COVID-19. And overall, students who felt more personally affected by COVID-19 reported less positive learning experiences and less positive well-being. Let's drill down deeper. We can see that as students get older, they report being affected by COVID-19 more significantly. A little over half, 51%, of high school students said that they were moderately or significantly affected by COVID-19. In contrast, 39% of our elementary students. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jen.
The second area of insight relates to learning. Here again, we'll see some of the same school level trends that Jimmy pointed out in the COVID effect. While learning at home last spring, half of students said their teachers gave them assignments that really helped them learn. We're going to complicate this finding, but let's linger on it for a moment and hear what students who thrived while learning at home had to say about their experience. This is the first of 4 short videos that we have to share with you today. The narrative for each was created from a qualitative analysis of nearly 60,000 open-ended student responses. The videos are read by 5 student volunteers. It is worth noting that students' qualitative responses to this survey were detailed, emotional, and replete with important lessons for us. Students had much that they wanted to share. As you will hear here, students who thrived were self-motivated, they preferred outcomes-based assignments, setting their own pace, and having control over their own time.
I love the fact that you don't need to go at the teacher's pace.
Learning from home is much more simpler and straightforward. In school, we get too many tasks that most of it's not very helpful. It takes longer than it really should take.
I'm actually motivated to get homework done early because I'll have time to do things I like. If you finish early, you can only read or sit around, so why bother?
Also, I can focus a lot more on advanced stuff that I just couldn't find the time to do when school is physically in session.
I hope that the virus goes away, although honestly, I wouldn't mind if distance learning stays.
Okay, now let's go back and complicate that finding about learning. While half of students said their teachers gave them assignments that really helped them learn, only 39% said that they learn a lot almost every day. As you can see, this contrasts with prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, when 59% of students reported learning a lot almost every day. Now, recall that Jimmy noted that older students reported a greater COVID effect. In light of this, as you can see in this descending graph, it makes sense that older students were less likely than younger students to report learning a lot almost every day. The needs of young students have rightly garnered ample national attention. However, this data reminds us that the learning of high schoolers also deserves our concerted attention. A third area of insight that we'd like to highlight for you relates to motivation. Put simply, students' responses show that learning and motivation are connected. As you can see, learning, which is the blue line, and motivation, the orange line, descend together across the grades from left to right. I'm going to pause so we can take that in. Learning and motivation descend together across the grades. Put otherwise, older students who report learning less also report being less motivated. Regarding learning and self-motivation, it is also important to note that students who typically get lower grades rated their learning experience and motivation last spring less positively than those who typically get higher grades. As you'll see in both the areas of learn a lot and motivation, there is a striking difference between the percentage of students who earned A's in the light gray and those who earned D's in the dark blue. While it would be very easy to dismiss this as predictable or self-evident, this reminds us to pay close attention at the local level as to whether the COVID effect might exacerbate existing learning gaps and might increase the risk of some students for dropping out.
So now that we've taken a look at students' perceptions of learning and motivation, it's important that we begin to address the fourth area of insight: obstacles that are keeping students from being able to learn at home and feel motivated. 70% of the students who took our survey said that they had at least one obstacle to learning. Of those 70% of students, the top 3 obstacles to learning were distractions at home, feelings of stress, depression, and anxiety or mental health, and lack of an adult at home who can help them with their schoolwork. It's important for us to dig into this data a little deeper and begin to disaggregate. Who of these 20,000 students was affected most by these obstacles. When we disaggregate the data by gender identity, the differences for students who chose mental health as one of their obstacles is startling. 38% of male-identified students said that stress, depression, and anxiety was an obstacle to their learning. That number rose to 57% for female-identified students and 70% for students who are non-binary. Of course, the affective and the cognitive go together, and this data reminds us that we need to tend to both how students think and what they feel. Another group that had data that was quite different than the aggregate was our English language learners or emerging bilingual students. As you can see here, their top obstacle to learning was still distractions at home, but where we see English language learners reporting obstacles at a much higher rate is the lack of an adult at home who can help them with their schoolwork and their own health. 40% of English language learners report my own health as an obstacle to learning, compared to only 24% for non-English language learners. And inspired by the ACEs methodology and the framework of trauma load, we also looked at which groups of students carried more obstacles. And what we found was that Black and Latinx students reported carrying a heavier obstacle load than their white and Asian peers. On average, Latinx students reported 3.3 obstacles to learning, and Black students reported 3.1, while Asian and white students reported 2.5. Now, as we listen to the following students describe their obstacles to learning, keep in mind how the number of obstacles might not fully capture the difference between the weight of each obstacle. You will hear how profoundly students' personal context shaped learning at home.
This semester just isn't my semester. I can't learn and watch my siblings at the same time, and I don't have a quiet space to do the work that needs to be done.
The internet is so bad that I no longer use the hotspot the school gave us.
I'm honestly not feeling my best anymore. School is an escape from my dad, and now I'm just with him all the time.
I recently started working again because restaurants are reopening. I also go to the grocery store.
I have many distractions, including my parents asking for things.
All right, Jimmy, should I?
Sorry about that, folks. I am back on.
I think we got most of the video, Jimmy, so I think we can pick it up here.
Right.
So you were hearing students describe the obstacles to learning and the quality of their obstacles to learning and how those differ for different groups of students. So as we consider the disparate obstacles facing students learning at home, our fifth area of insight, relationships with teachers, becomes even more important to delivering an equitable education. While learning at home last spring, relationships with teachers actually improved for some students. More than half, 54%, reported that there was an adult at school who they could talk to when they were feeling upset, depressed, or were having problems. What may be surprising is that on average, students reported that their relationships were better than usual while learning remotely. Consider, for example, that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, 30% of students reported that their teachers made an effort to understand their lives outside of school. While learning at home, this number jumped by 13%. As you will hear in this video, for some students, remote learning reshaped the student-teacher relationship in positive ways. In particular, students describe the impact of more personalized interactions with their teachers, and they hope that they will continue this in the 2021 school year.
Something about learning at home that I like is how much more attention teachers give us. Before COVID-19, teachers moderately did give one-on-one time, but now they take a lot more time to help everyone.
I don't have to wait to see a teacher. Anytime I need to contact any of my teachers, they
life outside of school and provide that extra help if we need it.
Sorry about that, folks. Of course, during all of our practice sessions, there were no problems, and now there are. But let's dive into our sixth and final area of insight today, students' sense of belonging and friendship. Now, while relationships with teachers improved for some students while learning at home, students across the board reported a diminished sense of belonging in their school community. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, 47% of students said that they felt like they were part of their school's community. And while that number is already somewhat disheartening, in spring of 2020, that number dropped to 30%. And when we asked students about friendship, the numbers got even lower. The ability to connect with friends received the lowest average rating of all items in our survey, with 59% of students saying they connect with their friends much less or less often than usual. Now, as you're likely starting to notice, we are convinced that COVID is having a significant effect on students' learning and their well-being. And of course, as we said before, the affective and the cognitive go together. Recall that nearly half of students said they were affected by COVID-19. And of those students who said they were significantly affected, 71% said they connect with their friends less than usual. And so we see a need this fall for educators and other organizations to create structures that allow for students to connect and build those relationships, not just with their teachers, but with their friends. In their qualitative comments, profound sadness was frequently expressed about being separated from, as students put it, my people. Students directly asked that schools find a way to continue activities that allow for social interaction, including, for example, theater, music, and other clubs. We're going to try one more video here, and let's see in their own words how students describe the importance of belonging and friendship.
being alone. I hate being alone.
I think for kids, especially human interaction, is very, very important.
Some of my friends don't have phones, so I can only see them if I drive by their house.
I'm losing some sanity here. I'm not able to play basketball or run track. I'm not able to hang out with my friends at lunch anymore.
I feel like I was a extrovert or an ambivert before, but now I've fully turned into an introvert. It feels a little lonely when you're at home doing all the things you used to do at school, but without friends. The support numbers on the back of our ID don't really help. You don't really want to talk to someone that you barely know. You just need your own friends.
I'm so grateful that last video worked. Thank you, Jimmy. We've looked together at just some of the students' way into data. There is so much more for you to explore on the website. And we've heard just a brief selection of student stories. Now we have the great privilege of hearing from 3 school leaders about what they've learned from their data. They will share about how they're using their lessons learned to plan for the 2021 school year and how they will continue to prioritize student voice even in this unprecedented time. So I'm turning it over to our friends Shelley Reggiani, Michael McCarthy, and Eric Amazio. Please keep submitting your questions in the Q&A box, and over to you, Shelley. You're muted.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. Hello, friends. My name is Shelley Reggiani. I'm the Executive Director of Equity and Instructional Services for the North Clackamas School District. North Clackamas is located just southeast of the Portland area in Oregon. And I wanted to raise your attention to that location intentionally, and I'll share with you a little bit more. North Clackamas serves approximately 17,500 students in 33 schools. We had just over 1,000 students participate in the YouthTruth Students Weigh-In Survey this June. This is our third year using YouthTruth, and we've used YouthTruth to help guide our school improvement process. We significantly feel that it's important to know the experiences of our students and to honor and magnify their voice. We saw in Jimmy's example some of the way that he's disaggregated data. That's really critical for us to know the students' experience by who they are and truly their identity, their race, their language, their gender identity, their participation in English language development, special education, etc. And for us in North Clackamas, we have a very large career technical center, which is an integral part of our school, to be able to know how our students participate there as well. North Clackamas has a deep equity focus and the use of an equity lens when making decisions. So as we look at YouthTruth, this really paired together. Two of our key equity lens questions are, number one, what systems of oppression might be at play within this situation? And two, are those affected by the decisions included in the decision? Using YouthTruth and the student voice is critical for us to understand the experience of students through those two lens questions. And it's part of leading through listening. Margaret Wheatley describes listening as a revolutionary act. It creates empathy. And when we have the humility to consider another's reality, that is our opportunity to learn. When we can hear with new ears, we can't unhear it. We can't unknow what our students tell us. This is the place where we can begin to heal. And as we saw from our student data that Jimmy shared, there is healing that needs to take place. North Clackamas students' weigh-in data was very similar to the national data, although 57% of our students, just a little over half of our students, said that they were moderately to significantly affected by the COVID experience. And we did find a direct correlation between the social emotional well-being, the stress, and the anxiety that students experience when we looked at those two numbers. We use this data for critical pieces, all of our reopening school plans. So I mentioned we live in just the area south of Portland, Oregon. And for those of you who have watched any national news, or if you're from the West Coast, you may have seen that Portland is a regular feature sometimes, and not always for the most positive reasons. While there are positive student-led demonstrations and positive marches, there are also violence and racial discord that is happening in Oregon. Oregon has a very rich and not wonderful racial history. We'll just put it that way. There is a long-standing issue of race and racism within our state, and one that our state has not yet fully grappled with. I want to bring that to your attention because as our students were going through the COVID distance learning experience, they were also having a nightly assault of what was happening within our own community, within 5 miles of our schools. These types of things happening, and happening to some community members that are directly relatives of our students, or who live in neighboring communities, or who were their family members. These incidences are not things that can be pulled apart. What is happening locally and happening globally also affects our students, particularly when they feel that they are in isolation, their window into the world, and that's one of the things that they're seeing. Really understanding the students' experience and that magnification was really important to us. As we looked at the student data and their motivation, the motivation which was totally led by the structure and the pace of learning and their relationship with their teachers, the stress and anxiety that our students were experiencing, and of course their sense of well-being and their sense of belonging. That's how we started to drive our reopening plans. Oregon is in a unique place where we have some unique gating that will dictate how we can move to in-person schooling. For my school district, we're starting with 100% distance learning, and it needs to be different than what our students experienced in the spring. Our students need deeper connection. They need to feel seen. They need to be heard. They need to feel the warmth and care of their school community around them. So we use this along with some other stakeholder feedback to really drive our communication to the community, our opening of school plans, and how we're going to start transitioning when we can into the hybrid and the full in-person learning, really centering on a culture of care, really centering on embracing the student's identity and how they are experiencing learning. And also, I'd like to highlight our need to amplify social services. That's one of the takeaways from this survey that was really key. Using our other stakeholder engagement and YouthTruth, we found that our students needed to access social services more. So that was one of the ways that we magnified our own experience with our relationship with our social service partners, finding that hope and that element of, all right, this is something that we can do for our students, making sure that we had resources available for students to do telehealth communications with mental health providers. Each one of our students could then access. How do we communicate that with families? How do we make sure that happens over the summer, which it hasn't in the past? All of these things were little elements of silver lining that we could continue. Also, the need for students to access meals. For the first time in our school district's history, we were able to provide meals during the summer every day. Between March and July, we provided over 141,000 meals to students in our community, in part because we knew that our students were telling us through the YouthTruth survey what they needed. For us, moving forward, we're going to continue to use the YouthTruth data in our communications with our administrators, in our opening school, creating that sense of empathy and understanding, because that is how we can truly drive our decision-making and our leadership when we consider feedback as a gift. It is a gift to know what our students are living and what they're experiencing, and honor that by amplifying their voice through the decisions that we make. And now I'd like to turn it over to Michael McCarthy.
Thanks, Dr. Reggiani. My name is Michael McCarthy. I'm the Executive Director of Student Services for Distinctive Schools. That means that I support the social emotional learning, school culture, special education, and other support services across our schools in Illinois and Michigan. We have 9 K-8 schools serving over 4,000 students in the Chicago and Metro Detroit area. We have our student population is made up of 61% Latinx students, 26% Black, 19% English language learners, 13% of our students have IEPs, and 86% of our students qualify for free and reduced meals. This was the first year that we used the YouthTruth survey. Actually, after a couple of years of courtship and trying to make it work, we were able to make it happen this year, and it had amazing results for our teachers to be able to elevate student voice and start to discover components of the student experience that hadn't surfaced before in our internal surveys. When we look back at our COVID-specific school building closure, we actually saw 2 very distinct different stories that were being told by the data. Our students, on the positive side, largely felt academically supported with resources and strong teacher connections. And our students actually reported that their learning happened closer to a similar clip that it did when they were in the school building. That being said, our learner engagement was also quite high, and in fact, like within the other school systems taking, we were proud to see that like there was a higher level of engagement. So there was a lot of positive and a lot of, I think, support for one another of like, okay, we kind of figured out a way to do this. Things are trending in the right way. On the other hand, when we looked at some of the other data, and this is, I think, some of the data that Jimmy and Jen surfaced in their conversation, our students reported a really significant loss of belonging with their school community, about the depth of their relationship with their teachers, and over half of our students reported that their teachers didn't make an effort to understand their lives outside of school. And that really hit us hard as we started to think about planning. Additionally, some of the data that we needed to look at was around those obstacles to learning, where our students identified higher percentages than the national norm around an adult being in their home to be able to support them with learning, their own personal health, the health of their family, and most sobering, the safety concerns that they experience in their own homes. Sorry. So then, in response to our survey insights, we gathered 80+ members of our community across our 9 schools with a singular focus of planning for this uncertain future. We knew that there were going to be systems, procedures, all of those things that were going to need to be put in place because of the pandemic. But rather than put our time focused on where to put hand sanitizers and how best to implement a thermometer check, we actually shifted our focus based on the YouthTruth findings to focus on what the student experience was going to be this upcoming school year. We're still designing all of this, but since June, our campus teams have been focused on how to build a sense of safety, both physical and emotional, a sense of belonging, a sense of hope, and a sense of joy in all of those procedures, activities, interactions, and elements of our model for the fall. So as a result of those conversations, we've taken a few important actions. Our campuses have developed a looping or modified looping plan for all of our students. Looping is when a teacher spends 2 or more years with the same group of students. And we were always looking for a way in which to sort of bridge the 1920 school year with the 2021 school year. Student-teacher relationship seems to be a natural place to be able to do that. And our current plan is that we'll have 10% of our teachers looping with their students from last year, as well as having a special start to the school year where the first 3 weeks are an identified time for shared teaching, mentoring, and social time for all students to go back to their previous year teacher to reconnect, reflect, and plan for the year ahead. The insights that we got from the YouthTruth data were really compelling in other areas as well, and actually encouraged us to extend a program that we had piloted at a few programs around extending this to our families. And really, to Dr. Reggiani's point about listening, extending that to empathy interviews and listening tours with all of our families prior to September 8th, when we formally began our schooling. We're also looking at a few other minor things that based on feedback, such as evaluating student and staff hours based on the remote setting, and to see how we might be able to adjust that for our middle school students. And we've partnered with some local organizations to be able to provide the trauma-informed support, counseling, et cetera, that's needed for our students and families. So in conclusion, I would just say that YouthTruth really helped us identify some important insights that we had not yet been able to recognize. And I want to give a special thanks to Jen and the team for inviting us today and to this broader initiative. It's so important that we take the time to understand where our students are going, especially in this ever-changing world. And as a result of the data that we've received, we've developed better plans and resources to be able to support those insights. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Erica Mazzio over at RSU 57 in the great state of Maine.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, I'm Erica Mazzeo. I'm here in Waterboro, Maine, which is about an hour southwest of Portland, Maine. So Portland to Portland connection. It's been great to be in the Zoomosphere and meet all of my colleagues from across the US, more opportunities than ever. We are about a 230 square mile district reaching from the interstate to the New Hampshire border. We have a great socioeconomic diversity in our school communities. We have 5 elementary schools, 1 consolidated middle school, and 1 consolidated high school. We have about 1,500 students participating in YouthTruth on an annual basis in the regular climate survey. And about the same was true in the COVID survey as well, though our official metrics don't place us in a rural low-income distinction because we're out by a few head count here and there. For all intents and purposes, we're a rural low-income district. We have about twice the state average of homelessness in our district identified, and that's with no shelter in place. So we have some additional challenges in serving our highest needs students in the socioeconomic realm. Let me see. Our students participated in the survey grades 6 through 12. We put the plane in the air in mid-March with our COVID response. Not really, probably not unlike most other districts, not really knowing how long it would go. And we had to change gears with the plane in the air and in a remote environment. So what we found is that it wasn't so impactful for grades 6 through 8, rather 9, 12, that motivator, that motivating factor that was addressed earlier in the presentation really came down heavy on our 9th through 12th graders. For better or worse, grading is a motivator. And it wasn't direct, it wasn't a directive, but it was a trend to reduce the risk environment for kids and move to a pass-fail model. And this was pretty consistent in a lot of other districts. We chose to go with credit with distinction and incomplete, but it takes on that same tone of broadening sort of the brackets of what it means to be in a passing realm. So that did impact motivation in a big way. Our data is not unlike it's consistent with the aggregate data really. 64% of our students said that there were obstacles to their learning in the home environment. That came as no surprise to us. 50% said they felt depressed, stressed, or anxious. We had 1/3 rating their sense of belonging as positive, and that number was unfortunately lower among female and non-binary students. So that's something we need to look at specifically, especially as it relates to anxiety. We found that it was a better than usual experience for our students with regards to their relationships with adults in the building, and I think that came through in the student voice portions of the presentation. They had stronger opportunities, maybe perhaps by time or availability of the instructional staff to connect with their teaching faculty and the support faculty in, for example, the school counseling office. I think the one thing I will say is that when we put this plane in the air, that great equalizer that is the threshold of the school building was removed. And there's no way to recreate that in hundreds, thousands of individual homes. And so we continue to struggle as we re-enter into the coming academic year. We are going to have a soft landing design in place for all of our learners. We got some town hall meetings and I was just getting some information, sorry. We'll have a soft landing in place for all of our learners that will be heavily weighted at the front end on the social emotional learning components. We're going to be addressing the known gaps, but we're not assessing the known gaps because we know what the gaps are. So we're trying to de-emphasize summative assessment, emphasize formative assessment, and really just begin with the known gaps and hopefully ease into the coming academic year. We're going to leverage the multi-tiered systems of support behavioral teams that were accelerated in their capacities over the course of this summer. We're rolling out the integration of CASEL competencies in all of our unit and lesson designs going forward. So it really pushed us to do that. The data that we will have, we've reviewed it in committee, we've reviewed it in administration, we've reviewed it with multi-tiered system of support, universal and advanced teams, but we're gonna review that with all instructional and support staff upon return. So everybody will have the opportunity to synthesize the data and what it means for them in their role. It will help us to establish goals and hopefully to remove any remaining assumptions that we have about our learners and their needs. And it will what I'm hoping is that child first perspective, just bring it all back into the forefront and give us, deepen our understanding of the learner's experience in the fall and what a learner needs from us in the coming year. And I just shout out to all administration, teaching staff, boards across the country who at present are presenting, you know, what might have seemed inconceivable 8 months ago to their towns to reimagine education at this point in time. Just deep admiration for all the work that my colleagues on the screen here have done, that YouthTruth has brought to us to empower our decisions, and just tremendous gratitude on behalf of the learners in the communities we're all serving.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing your unique stories with all of us. And we're now going to turn it over to some questions. So if you have more questions that are that you are interested in learning about, put them into the Q&A and we'll go through a few here. The first question is for Michael. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the empathy interviews and what that process is like?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is maybe our 4th year of trying to do it, and it's been more campus-based. So out of our 9 campuses, they sort of like have been designing what that looks like. But it's actually now something that we've put into our calendar, that within the first 3 weeks of the school year, all of our families will have time, and there's time built into the schedule for a family empathy interview. And so it's a way to get the family's perceptions about the child's school experience, and to really try to understand how to engage family members within the school community as we move forward. So it's going to be questions like, what does your child love about school? What do they like the least? What do they do outside of school? What is something that makes you very proud of your child? How do you feel when you walk into your child's school? Tell me about your relationship with adults in your child's school. So we're going to be shifting those questions, I think, over the course of this year to be specific to the period that we're in. But that's the general idea, and we try to do it as early as possible so that the first interaction that our staff members are having with families is an act of listening, rather than an act of like reporting out anything else on the school side.
Thank you, Michael. The next question is for all 3 of our panelists. Someone is asking that they would be interested in learning about state or county imposed guidelines that districts were required to follow, and how you were able to balance both those requirements and also student needs. Anyone want to start with that?
I'd be happy to address a bit of an Oregon context. We have a couple different guardrails, if you will, that are in place for us. The first would be health related, that in order for schools and districts to return to hybrid and in-person learning, there are certain health matrices that have to be met for a duration of at least 3 weeks, and that's by county. And so each county may be entering into different phases of learning at different times than one another. And Oregon is a pretty vast state and pretty diverse regionally, not only regionally, but also by race, economics, and language, et cetera. North Clackamas has 72 different languages spoken, for example, a very multiracial district, and a lot of economic diversity as well. I'd say inside of the other types of guardrails would be making sure that when we're in distance learning, how are the needs of students being met, that the legal requirements for FAPE, for example, that FERPA is always attended to, that the needs of English language learners, our emergent bilinguals, are fully attended to, that we're following our district Title III or our LAU plan. All of those pieces are in place. Our state is fortunate that we have a very strong working relationship with the Oregon Department of Education and some direct contacts there, so that we can consult with them and provide feedback so that we have some strong samples and some networks there. Those would be the places that I would say that we have some of the strongest guardrails that are in place in making sure that students' needs are met.
Thank you, Shelley. Erica or Michael, anyone want to also answer that? Okay.
I can jump in. We would have to timestamp my response because we continue to get guidance, and some of it's guidance and some of it's directives. And in our state, we're a local control state, so it's mostly guidance. And we will be receiving color coding by county bi-weekly. So very shortly, we'll be receiving our second iteration of color-coded guidance in the state of Maine. Right now, we're all green, which allows us to return at 3-foot distancing for children masked and 6 foot for adults. So many of us are able to, for those who wish to return, we're able to accommodate that. I just echo what Shelley said about accommodations and making sure that all needs are met and T's are crossed and I's are dotted in terms of those regulations. I mean, local control can be a good thing and it can be not a helpful thing. And so we've gained tremendous capacity in over 200 districts across the state because we've had to come up with unique response. So it's been challenging, but I think we've grown in response to this.
Jimmy, to that, I want to add that in Oregon, there was a expectation that districts will consult with community. It's pretty broad based, and in particularly with our native populations in the state of Oregon. We have 9 federally recognized tribes in the state. And to Michael's point earlier, the need to do empathy interviews is one of the best ways to gather that firsthand data. In North Clackamas, we used a variety of things. We used a thought exchange survey, traditional surveys, and then we also, similar to how Michael did, conducted empathy interviews. But we were intentional there too to make sure that we did those empathy interviews with a cross-sectional representation of our district by race, by gender, by language, and by socioeconomic status, so that we had voices of our community that represented the full breadth of who our community is.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Erica. So one of the things that I would like to ask the group, and this kind of goes to Michael first about, Michael, you said you were going to be asking new questions. What new types of new questions will you be asking? But also to Erica and Shelley, is there anything else that you need to know from students this fall to help inform your plans as to make sure that their learning is impactful as the fall semester goes on? What else do you need to know from your students? And we'll start with Michael.
Sure. So those questions are still being developed. And I would say a big part of that is we're already, based on, this is probably more of a national thing as well, but like the idea of like family intake surveys to understand better what the family and student experience has also been like, is those intake surveys are a part of the requirement for both our Chicago schools and our Detroit schools. So there won't be like redundancy there. I think we'll probably lean into questions about like how will you feel safe? How will you feel? What will help you feel hopeful about this school year? What could bring you joy? And what could we do to increase your sense of belonging? Based on what we've been working on this summer, that's what I think we'll be working on. In terms of that question about like what else will we be asking our students, I think that we have to look to everything since late May and talk about like the racial injustice that has been going on in this country for so long. And so if we're not asking those questions in our schools, we won't be doing the right thing. And so that's where I know we plan on at least starting. I don't pretend to know all what those questions are going to be at this point, but I do know that that's where we're going to start.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. And then the last question that just came in before we go to our closing is what actions have your districts taken to improve student connection to their schools? And do you have any recommendations on how we can improve student involvement and connections?
I would like to share one idea and a shout out to our principal, Carmen Gilman at Milwaukee High School in Oregon. Through her brave leadership, one of the strategies that she did this last year that we would like to replicate across all of our schools pretty powerful in terms of creating that culture of care and connection. It's a school of about 1,300 students, totally doable, regardless of one size. The staff came together and she said, okay, in teams, we're gonna find out which teacher, which staff member has the closest relationship with each student. So by the end of their session together, each student was assigned, if you will, a check and connect adult. And a teacher may have had, say, a staff member may have had, say, 16 students on their list that they checked in with regularly. We know when we disaggregated our data, at Milwaukee High School, our students had a stronger relationship with their teachers as a direct result of making sure that they had that adult connection. Because we're starting on distance learning again, that is one of our biggest takeaways. We knew that student motivation was connected to the structure and support and engagement provided by their teacher, and their relationship with their teacher was key. That was also something that we found in our other stakeholder engagement. So when we triangulated those pieces from empathy interviews, parent surveys, and YouthTruth, that came together. Relationship as the foundation. I was really, really impressed with her leadership in taking that action to make sure that her students had that care and connection. And I would say that that would be a recommendation that is very replicable. Every child can learn when they have a significant relationship with an adult. And making that relationship established, frequent, the frequent connection is one way that students can thrive even in a distance learning environment.
Thank you, Shelley. Okay, so we have about 3 minutes left, and I want to turn it over to Kent quickly to see, Kent, do you have any closing words or any final personal thoughts for us? And then I'll close out with some final wrap-ups.
You know, I hate to use up any precious time when you've got these great school people, you know, available. My only observation would be that, you know, we can't have too much information. So a real premium on these kinds of data, you know, leverage YouthTruth and get the other kinds of data as both all three of the panelists have suggested they're doing, to give you all the best possible picture of how to help kids.
Thank you. So we want to thank you all so much for your attendance at our webinar. I want to thank our panelists, Shelley, Michael, and Erica, as well as Kent for your opening remarks. And of course, to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Jen DeForest. Also a shout out and thank you to our 5 student volunteers for the videos, and my apologies that a couple of those didn't go all the way through. But we'll be following up with you all with a copy of the slide deck, as well as a link to the website where you can see the rest of the data from our Students Weigh In survey. You'll also get a recording of this webinar too, if you want to send that far and wide. We also encourage you to reach out to us if you want to learn more about working with us. Now, with school starting, we want to recognize the incredible work that you all are doing to make this school year happen in a way that will be safe and impactful for your students. We know that student voice must be central to our approach to opening schools and having meaningful learning this year. And this is uncharted territory for all of us. And the students' experiences this year are going to be unlike anything any of us have ever encountered when we were students. So it's time to listen to our young people, and it's imperative that we learn from them. We sincerely invite you to join us in this work. Thank you again for your time. Jen and I are going to be sticking around for a few more minutes, and if our panelists have time to stick around to answer more questions, we can, but just wanted to end there and thank you all very much. All right, looks like we still have a few more participants on, and we did have another really great question come in, and this can be to any of our panelists that are still on with us. Do you have any recommendations on how to enhance peer-to-peer relationships?
I could jump in with 2 quick cool things that I love about one of our schools. So CICS Prairie developed a like recess within the remote learning program where the social workers, deans, and other team members created like a game that could be played by Zoom, and really facilitated kids being there. Now, the vision for that is eventually it's a little bit more free space, free play for students to be able to do that. But I thought that was an important step to being able to like bring the students together who might want to be able to be around one another. And so now their next step is to like, how do you facilitate that in a way where it is the peers together? A more peer-to-peer, directly peer-to-peer is a Bulldogs Belong program at CICS West Belden, where all students in the school are placed into multi-age K through 8 mentoring groups. And those continued at CICS West Belden over the course of the year, even during the school building closure, where they work on social emotional learning skills and connect with one another through the leadership of the older students in the group.
One of the things that we're going to continue in North Clackamas, particularly at the middle and high school level, is our use of student affinity groups by race. Those were established and through video conferencing with their training facilitator. That's something that can still happen, where students by affinity can continue to meet. We can do that with clubs as well. Really prioritizing our students' social emotional connection is really important for us. On the academic side, one of the things that really came to light was providing professional development to our teachers. Teaching virtually is very different than brick and mortar. There are some things that we retain and some things that we need to let go of in terms of our practices. And how we create student interaction and engagement and giving students that opportunity to use academic English in discourse in the classroom is really critical, especially for our English learners. So how do we teach and provide support to our teachers in teaching in this new methodology to make sure that students have engagement every day academically, and that helps nurture their relationships and their friendships inside and outside of the classroom experience.
So we're moving from an asynchronous to a synchronous model, and we're hoping that inside of the instructional design, this will allow those who choose to remain remote to partner more freely and closely with their groups inside the classroom. So some of the things along the lines of like what Michael and Shelley had said, but we're also looking how the instructional design block can bring the remote learner into the classroom experience more closely with peers. So there's an opportunity for SEL inside of their group time that is smaller, because the remote environment, it was like everybody on the screen, and that was maybe too big of a group to facilitate meaningful conversations in some cases. So we're hoping that because we've got about 25% remote and 70% in kind of thing, then we are looking at smaller groups for the activities, which we hope will help facilitate deeper conversations.
Thank you. All right, and this is going to be the last question. So are the schools using video conferencing like Teams or Zoom to conduct classes? And in regards to creating connections, would you recommend using video conferencing to create student groups or one-on-one conferencing?
We are using live video conferencing using Google Meets in my school district. And a couple of things first. We had talked about guardrails earlier. Safety, definitely one of the guardrails. And how does that align to your district policy for use of video, and training for the adults and training for kids and creating those norms. What are classroom norms? Just like you do in brick and mortar schools, what are the classroom norms inside of video conferencing? There are some amazing tools like breakout sessions that teachers can create inside of their conferencing video conference so that students can have small group discussions. So I would say, regardless if you're using, whichever platform you're using for video conferencing, ask your district support persons, ask your partners, what type of techniques and tools does that platform have for small breakout groups? What are the safety protocols also? And how can we leverage those breakout groups for small group conversation? Doing large group, if you have 25 students in a class, it's very difficult to get everyone's voice in the space. So how do you make sure that student interaction and elevating student voice in whichever space that you have can happen within those breakouts, those small groups, or if you do small group later on, say you have your whole group now, and then you have some office hours or small group time for intervention, making sure that every student's voice is in the space will be critical.
Yeah, I totally agree with Shelley, and would just say we were quite happy with our use of Zoom and the breakout rooms to the end that Shelley described.
So we're in the Zoomosphere, and we're using live streaming, and we're going to be using recording functions, and we are using platforms Seesaw for pre-K through third, and then for 4th grade through 12th grade, we are using the Google Classroom platform.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much to our panelists. Thank you everyone for attending today, and for those of you that stuck around for the further Q&A, thank you very much. We are going to end our webinar here, but please, like I said, feel free to contact any of us. Our emails are up here on the screen, and we are going to be following up with a recording of the slide deck, and a link so that you can see more important data. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks guys, bye.
Thank you all.